Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Politics Relax podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the new heartbeat law, which has been introduced in Texas. It's effectively curtailing abortions and stops them after 6 weeks. That includes rape and incest. So it's definitely divided a lot of opinion. Let's just go straight into it. Does anybody want to start?
I just think that it's wholly against it, and especially when it comes into incest and rape. Even there is some medical exceptions, but it's very sort of extreme. Like, it's not a choice. It's if it's going to kill the mother, then you can. And I think 6 weeks, barely any people would know if they were pregnant at 6 weeks. It's just a ridiculous line to draw it out with the heartbeat, saying that when the heartbeat starts, that's when. I just think it's just a very negative thing for women's rights, especially in all of America, because it sort of sets a precedent now for Texas, for all sort of states to look into these types of laws.
Yeah, and we've heard over the last few days that Florida is looking into a similar sort of bill, which is worrying. And if we start to see this across, I'm guessing it's probably going to be predominantly red states, then we could really start to see a divide, a state divide and a political divide on this debate. And actually, I think it's 3/4 of Americans do support Roe v. Wade and support a right for women to get abortions. So it's not particularly representative of the whole of America. Tommy?
Well, I think in general, I've been somewhat consistent with my views on abortion. Now, I'm generally not in support of ending the life of a baby and a fetus. This isn't to say I'm against all abortions. Like, I would be fine with people getting abortions if it's rape, incest, some reason like that. But I think it's hard to measure what has been rape. Incest easier to solve, but I'm not saying that people would lie about this, but it is harder to measure. I mean, it's hard to find what has been rape without conclusive evidence. But aside from that fact, I think 6 weeks is a bit too early for a ban on abortions. I'm not saying there should be a complete ban, but I think that it should be, in general, down to the person and couple. But I think there should be at least some morality in thinking that maybe farther later on in the pregnancy, such as third trimester, late second trimester, I think that's a bit too late. But for earlier on, and for obviously cases like rape and incest, I think it's good, but 6 weeks too early.
Yeah, so we've seen this news, and I'd just like to respond to you when you say it hasn't actually been announced yet. It's yet to be completely passed. And one thing that's interesting to note, you say it doesn't represent the views of America. I probably agree with you. It doesn't represent the views of America, but representative of Texas is a different question. But we also have to bear in mind that when we say representative of Texas, we've got to also say that they're mostly men. So there's many different ways to look at it. Yes, it's the new abortion law, I would say, is representative of Texas, but I would say that it's probably more representative of the men in Texas, which is key to move apart. So that's why they have the federal system to launch different laws in different states if need be. But certainly, I think that the strictness of this law that has been passed is too extreme for me. Like Tommy said earlier, the 6 weeks, I think, way too strict. You've got to have more time to make a decision on that. And I think you should probably pass something. You should probably investigate this further. I don't know how they would do it in America, but yeah, they've got to work on that. But it will be passed through the House of Representatives and probably will come through into law.
Yeah, so I think you're right in saying that this bill that's likely to be passed through Texas House of Representatives, and what we'll see, I think is very evident now. The divides on this issue throughout the entire country are becoming clearer and clearer, whether it's blue states and red states, different communities. I mean, for me, this just shows how the US as a country is very much patchwork. We often think of the US as a country that is built off one written constitution for a start, and everything is solid, and there are boundaries. But in actual fact, I think this just shows us that on really key social issues, the massive divides that can open up across the country, and South North here is, I think, a key one in abortion, and Texas clearly is one of the particularly socially conservative states, and so it's unsurprising to see a law go through like this. I would personally tend to be very hesitant towards it, because from what I can see, what actual women are saying is that they feel that this could infringe on their rights, and who am I to say that this law is a good thing if they're not gonna believe that? So from my point of view, I think that of course we have to have certain boundaries, we have to have weight limits and that, but from what I can see, I think it's 90% of abortions in Texas happen after the 6-week mark. So if you're thinking about it practically, you're ruling out those 90% of abortions. I mean, from my point of view, I'm sure that is going to really infringe on women's rights, and that's, I think, a negative thing. And I do hope that not too many states follow.
I mean, I find it frankly shocking that they brought this in, and you bring up a good statistic there, which is 90%, and it's all but banning abortions. And the thing that I find especially shocking is the rape and incest bit. I saw an article, I think it was from Insider, that said it was from a person who worked in a rape clinic in Texas, and they said they saw a 13-year-old girl who was raped by her grandfather travel an hour across Texas to get an abortion. She would not have been able to get that abortion under the state's new law. So there could be some really, really saddening and shocking cases coming out of Texas. Megan.
Yeah, I think you came on to what I agree with, but I think about the issue being so black and white, with some people against it, some people for it. I think it's just sort of putting into partisanship, is just sort of putting an issue that is women's rights, like it's our right. It should be our right, especially in, like you said, in cases of incest, and like these are like 13-year-old young girls who've been raped by family members and horrific things that we couldn't even imagine. And I just don't think that it should even come into partisanship. It shouldn't be a divide at all, especially in those extreme cases. It shouldn't be any right that should ever be infringed on, because if it's not consensual, then there's nothing that they can do to avoid it. So how can they be expected, 13, 12-year-old kids, to keep a baby and it be justified sort of on the grounds of being a Republican or a Democrat?
Yeah. Wait, Drew, have anything else to add? Or right?
No.
Okay. And actually, I mean, I mentioned this before, but I think it was 75% of Americans are in support of abortion. I think that was in some cases. So it's not nearly as divided as people like to make out. It's like, and actually pro-life gets a very big share of the debate and the kind of talking especially in the media, when it really, really shouldn't, because it's not supported by the majority of people. And actually, there are things like, I don't know, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but it shouldn't be getting as much airtime as it does get. And there are lots of these very extreme people, as we were seeing in Texas. And I think it's right to call them extreme, because 75% of Americans agree with abortions, that want to bring in laws that curtail women's rights. And even if it's not in the case of rape or abortion, women should still have the access to get an abortion, because it can lead to really saddening situations.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh no, Tommy.
So
response.
I just want to say something small, if that's all right. So I've just had a look on Texas Tribune.org to check the demographics of the Texas House of Representatives, and we haven't actually spoken about this yet. This is a factor of democracy. I'm sure you know what's coming. The number of women in the House compared to men is 27%. So what does that say about democracy if Texas are legislating against women and way more than 60% of their House are men, then I think that's an issue. I think that's probably a bigger issue about democracy than obviously abortion is a massive issue, but it's the issue that needs to be talked about a lot more, which we haven't really seen. Tommy?
Well, firstly, in response to Megan, I'm not sure if what I'm going to say is what she fully meant because we haven't really discussed it specifically. But I think abortions, like we've said early on, for cases that we know, like rape, incest, and even if the baby's just unwanted, early on, I think it should be fine, should be the couple's choice. But then when you get later on, when you get to the late stages where it's actually forming into an actual human, I don't think it's very moral to allow these to happen. And I get that people say, "Oh, it should be my choice throughout," but when you're at those very late stages of the pregnancy, like I said, late second trimester and early third, you can get to the point where some people think it's moral. And then in response to how 27% of the House was female for the voting of this, I think for most significant issues like abortions and like gun laws, they need to actually consult and speak to people that are going to be affected. They need to like speak to groups of like past victims or whatever, and then possibly people who might be against it. They need to listen to everyone's reasons for this rather than having a set group of people say on everything.
Anyone got any final points, or should we wrap up?
I just say that I think that particular stat shows, and if you look at stats for representation in the nationwide Senate and House of Representatives, you'll see some similar, equally bad statistics. And I think it shows that in America, there is still a lot of work to do. The Republican Party, I'm afraid, being the main culprit at this time. And hopefully what we do see is a development over time as we've seen in places like Canada, as we've seen here in the UK much earlier on, the Conservative parties developing more moderate and socially liberal policies. And hopefully that will include more representation. And it's something the Republican Party are falling behind on at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like. Cheers.